Here's a question that feels like it belongs on a third-grade civics quiz, but right now, it is practically setting Washington, D.C. on fire. In a democracy, who actually gets to vote?
It sounds like the world's easiest trick question. You want to say citizens, and then, move on to the next topic.
Exactly. That is the knee-jerk response. But if you have been scrolling through the headlines, or if you've been tracking the ferocious legislative battles in Congress lately, you know that this simple answer is actually the eye of a massive political hurricane.
It really is. We're not just talking about a theoretical debate here.
No, we are talking about legislation that could fundamentally alter how you listening right now interact with your government.
It's one of those moments where the political rhetoric is turned up to 11, but the actual mechanics, the plumbing of how elections work, get lost in all the noise.
Which is exactly why we are here. Today we are doing a deep dive into the debate over non-citizen voting and the specific piece of legislation driving the conversation, the SAVE Act.
The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act.
And to get to the bottom of this, we've pulled together a serious stack of sources. We aren't just reading tweets. We're looking at legislative analysis from the National Conference of State Legislatures.
Right, to understand the mechanics.
We've got data hard numbers from the Brennan Center for Justice on the left, the Cato Institute in the Libertarian middle, and the Heritage Foundation on the right.
We really wanted to avoid the echo chamber on this one. We have the text of the bill, the arguments for it, the arguments against it, and, the actual fraud data.
Plus, we're pulling in some fascinating historical records from places like the Connecticut legislative libraries that might completely change how you view the tradition of voting in America. So our mission is to cut through the talking points and figure out three things.
Okay, lay them out.
1, what would the SAVE Act actually change about, say, your trip to the DMV? 2, is it solving a real problem? What does the data actually say about non-citizens voting? And 3, and this is the part that honestly blew my mind, the incredibly weird, forgotten history of non-citizen suffrage in the United States.
It's a history that definitely defies the Founding Fathers' narrative we're usually taught.
So let's jump right in. Segment 1, the SAVE Act. Strip away the politics for a second. Mechanically, what is this bill trying to do?
At its absolute core, the SAVE Act is an amendment to the National Voter Registration Act, or NVRA. But to understand the change, you have to understand the status quo.
Okay, so how does it work now?
Yeah.
I mean, usually it's at the DMV, right? Or you fill out a form you got in the mail, you write down your name, address, and you sign it.
Right, and that signature is the key. Currently, most states operate on a system of attestation.
Attestation.
You check a box that says, I am a U.S. citizen, and you sign the form under penalty of perjury. You are legally swearing that you are eligible.
So it's basically the honor system, but with the threat of federal prison if you're lying.
Essentially, yes. Now, states do back-end checks. They check Social Security databases, things like that. But the front-end experience for the voter is just an oath.
And the SAVE Act flips that.
It completely flips it. It introduces a requirement for documentary proof of citizenship, or DPOC.
DPOC. Okay, so that means my signature isn't enough anymore.
Correct. Under the SAVE Act, you cannot be registered to vote in a federal election unless you physically present proof of citizenship. And this is where it gets tricky. A standard driver's license doesn't count.
Wait, really? I feel like my driver's license is the gold standard for ID. I use it to get on planes.
For identifying who you are, sure. But remember, most states issue licenses to legal residents who aren't citizens, people on green cards, people on work visas.
Ah, I see.
So a standard license proves you are who you say you are, but it doesn't prove you're a citizen. Under the SAVE Act, to register, you'd need a birth certificate, a valid U.S. passport, or naturalization papers.
Okay, hold on. The logistics of that. I don't carry my birth certificate around in my wallet. It's in a safe box somewhere. I definitely don't bring my passport to the DMV.
And that's the logistical nightmare the National Conference of State Legislatures warns about. The NVRA, the motor voter law, was designed to make registering easy. You do it while you're getting your license.
Right.
The SVE Act effectively forces the DMV to become an immigration verification agency.
And we all know how much the DMV loves adding complex, time-consuming tasks to their workflow.
Universally adored for their speed, right? But seriously, the sources point out this is an unfunded mandate. The bill creates massive new responsibilities for the states, but it doesn't provide federal money to pay for any of it.
There's another term in the legislative analysis that caught my eye, and it sounded terrifyingly bureaucratic. A bifurcated system.
Oh, it's a legal headache waiting to happen. See, the Constitution gives states the power to run elections.
But the federal government sets rules for federal elections.
Exactly. So if a state can't or simply won't overhaul its entire system to meet these new federal DPOC requirements, they might be forced to maintain two separate lists of voters.
Two lists.
Yes. List A, people who showed a passport and can vote for president. And List B, people who just signed the state form and can only vote for, say, mayor or governor.
That sounds like a recipe for chaos at the polling place.
Yeah.
Here's your ballot. Oh, wait, you're on list B. Give me that back.
It's incredibly confusing. Arizona actually has real-world experience with this because of a state law they passed. It's a huge burden. And the SAVE Act isn't asking nicely. It includes a private right of action.
Which means what?
It means if you, a private citizen, feel the law isn't being enforced properly, you can sue the election officials. And it establishes criminal penalties for officials who mistakenly register someone.
So if I'm a registrar and I accidentally let someone through who shouldn't be there, I'm personally liable.
The stakes go way up. The incentive becomes to be overly cautious, which critics argue could lead to eligible citizens being turned away just because they didn't bring the right paperwork.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the mechanics. It's a tightening of the screws. But, legislation usually happens for a reason. Proponents argue this is necessary to save the integrity of the vote, which begs the question, is this actually happening?
Right. Is this a crisis?
Do we have a crisis of non-citizens deciding our elections?
This is where we have to put aside the rhetoric and look at the spreadsheets, and we have data from across the entire political spectrum.
Okay, so we've got the Brennan Center, Cato, and the Heritage Foundation. Do they agree on anything?
Surprisingly, yes. The consensus, looking at decades of data, is that non-citizen voting is, to quote the Brennan Center, vanishingly rare.
Rare is a subjective word. Give me the numbers.
Okay, let's look at 2016, a highly scrutinized election. The Brennan Center surveyed 42 jurisdictions that oversaw 23.5 million votes.
Yeah.
They found roughly 30 incidents referred for investigation.
30 out of 23.5 million.
That's about 0.00001%. And it's not just them. Look at North Carolina. They did a massive state audit of the 2016 election, 4.8 million votes cast. They found 41 non-citizens who cast ballots.
Okay, but what about the Heritage Foundation? They maintain a dedicated database of election fraud cases. What does their own database say?
I looked through it. Their database goes back to 2002. Across 2 decades of elections, we're talking millions of votes cast nationwide, they identify only about 85 confirmed cases involving non-citizens.
85 cases in 20 years. That's not the tip of the iceberg. That's an ice cube.
It's statistically negligible. Even in Ohio, where the Secretary of State recently did a review, they found roughly 44 non-citizens had voted over a 15-year period.
But this doesn't make intuitive sense to some people. I mean, we have millions of non-citizens, legal or not. If the current system is just signing a form, why aren't more people cheating?
The Cato Institute has a really compelling breakdown on this. It comes down to incentive structures. Think about what a non-citizen actually risks by casting a single vote.
I assume deportation is the big one.
It's the nuclear option. If you vote as a non-citizen, it is a federal crime. You face prison time, immediate deportation, and this is the kicker, a permanent bar from ever becoming a naturalized citizen.
So if I'm here on a green card, I've probably waited years, paid thousands in legal fees. If I vote, I'm risking blowing all of that up.
Exactly. You are betting your entire future in America for the sake of one single vote in an election where millions are cast. The risk-reward ratio is just insane.
That makes sense. It's not that the door's unlocked. It's that walking through it triggers a trapdoor under your feet.
Plus, there are back-end checks. We mentioned things like jury duty. If you get a jury summons and you check the box, I can't serve, I'm not a citizen, that information often gets cross-referenced with voter rolls.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so if you're registered to vote but told the court you aren't a citizen, that raises a flag immediately. So it's not purely an honor system. It's an honor system surrounded by tripwires.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Because if you listen to the supporters of the SAVE Act, they don't necessarily dispute that the current numbers are low. They argue the non-zero principle.
Right. The argument is that even one illegal vote cancels out the vote of a legitimate citizen.
And it's about trust, isn't it? If half the country believes the system is porous, doesn't that damage democracy just as much as actual fraud?
That is the core of the argument. Proponents say that election integrity isn't just about the math, it's about the perception of security. They view the ballot box as a fortress that needs the drawbridge up.
Which brings us to a really interesting philosophical pivot. We're treating citizen voting as the only natural, obvious way to do things. But looking at the history sources you pulled up, that hasn't always been the American way, has it?
No, and this is the part that usually floors people. We tend to project our current rules backward onto history, but for a huge chunk of American history, non-citizen voting wasn't just a loophole, it was standard policy.
The outline mentions a specific cutoff date, 1926.
Right. Before 1926, as many as 40 states allowed non-citizens to vote in elections.
40 states, that's almost the whole country at the time.
It was. If you go back to the 1800s, especially as the country was expanding westward, the priority wasn't locking down the vote. The priority was settlement. They wanted people to come, buy land, pay taxes, and integrate.
So if I'm a Swedish immigrant in Minnesota in 1880, I haven't naturalized yet. I can still vote for governor.
In many cases, yes, it was called declarant suffrage. It meant that if you had gone to a court and legally declared your intent to become a citizen, they handed you a ballot.
That is a wild shift from where we are today. So what happened? Why did we slam the door shut?
2 words: war and xenophobia. The shift started after the War of 1812, but it really accelerated during and after World War I.
The fear of foreign influence.
Exactly. There was a massive wave of suspicion against Germans, a fear of radicals and anarchists coming from Europe. State after state started rewriting their constitutions. Arkansas was actually the last holdout, finally banning it in 1926.
So this idea that only citizens vote isn't some timeless founding father principle. It's actually a policy shift driven by 20th century anxiety.
Correct. And what's fascinating is that we are seeing a resurgence of this debate today, but in reverse at the local level.
Right. I've read about this. There are towns that are bringing it back.
Tacoma Park, Maryland, is the famous one. They've allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections, mayor, city council, since 1993. A couple towns in Vermont. And recently, Washington, D.C. passed a law allowing it.
And just to clarify, we are talking strictly local ballots here.
Yes. Nobody is letting non-citizens vote for president or Congress. These are municipal elections. The argument is simple: no taxation without representation.
The classic slogan.
Supporters argue, look, these people are legal residents. They have green cards. They pay property taxes. Their kids go to the local public schools. If the city council decides to raise taxes, shouldn't the people paying those taxes have a say?
It's about having a literal stake in the community.
Exactly. And there's an integration argument, too. If you let people vote for the school board, they become more engaged, more on the path to full citizenship.
But on the flip side, the backlash has been fierce. You have the argument that citizenship has to mean something. If you give away the perks for free, why, buy the cow?
That's the devaluation argument. You hear this from opponents like Representative Nick LaLota. He's quoted saying, voting is a sacred right reserved for U.S. citizens. The idea is that if you unbundle it, you devalue the achievement of naturalization.
And there's still the national security angle, right?
Definitely. The fear that allowing non-citizens to vote, even locally, creates a slippery slope or invites foreign interests into domestic policy.
Which leads us perfectly into the legal battleground, because this isn't just philosophical, it's a constitutional clash.
It is. So let's look at the hierarchy. The law of the land from 1996 strictly bans non-citizens from voting in federal elections. Period.
So no non-citizen is voting for president legally anywhere.
No. But because states run elections, they have wiggle room on state and local rules. However, we've seen a wave of states recently explicitly amending their constitutions to say only citizens can vote.
I saw that list. Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Ohio. These are recent changes.
Very recent, 2020, 2022. It's a preemptive strike. They see what's happening in Maryland and Vermont, and they are locking the door before the idea spreads.
And D.C. is in a unique spot because they aren't a state. Congress is basically their overlords.
Right. D.C. passed their local voting law, and the House of Representatives actually passed a resolution to overturn it. It hasn't passed the Senate, but it shows you how high the tension is. It's a perfect storm of local control versus federal philosophy.
So let's try to pull this all together. On one side, we have the SAVE Act. It's a legislative push for strict documentation aimed at solving a vulnerability.
A vulnerability that the data says is currently being exploited about as often as people get struck by lightning.
Right. But on the other side, we have the argument that the current honor system isn't secure enough, regardless of the data. And looming over all of this is a history that shows the definition of voter has been, well, elastic for centuries.
It really comes down to two competing visions of the ballot box. Is it a fortress that needs to be defended? Or is it a town square that should be open to everyone who lives and pays taxes there?
And for you, listening, This matters because if the SAVE Act passes, the friction of democracy goes up.
Huh.
Your next trip to the DMV isn't just a form signing. It's a document check.
And think about the people on the margins. The elderly person who lost their birth certificate decades ago, the student who just moved. If we demand a passport to register to vote, we are prioritizing security, yes, but at what cost to participation?
It raises a heavy question about the trade-offs we're willing to make.
I'll leave you with this thought. We often talk about citizenship like it's a light switch. You're off or you're on. You're an alien or you're a citizen.
Yeah.
But our lives aren't binary. We are integrated into our communities in 1,000 ways. Your non-citizen neighbor might coach your kid's soccer team and pay for the road you drive on. If we build a wall around the ballot docs to keep out the 0.0001% of fraudsters, do we also wall out the millions of eligible Americans who just can't find their paperwork in time? At what point does the sanctity of citizenship actually start to erode the participation that makes democracy work in the first place?
Something to chew on the next time you see a register to vote sign. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Take care.